Hi, Kelsey here, and today we're going to build and design this space-themed letter. You can find the files for the lowercase letters on my Etsy and also on my Patreon. And please don't forget to subscribe. Let's get started in Design Space. We are going to use files that I've created as well as files on Design Space and in Cricut Access. So I have uploaded everything. These lowercase letters have overlays included on them. So I'm just going to reverse it. You actually don't have to do this, but I'm just resizing this letter. I have just picked out the K. I did this by hiding all of the other letters in the overlays and then just reopening the K. And now I'm going to size it so that it's actually the exact same size as the letter. You can find the exact size by clicking out the outline that you see on just the smaller front portion of the K. And so I'm going to resize that. And now I'm going to do insetting. So you can inset and you can offset with Cricut Design Space. And this is only able to be done on the desktop version of Design Space. So when you work with your offset and your inset, you're going to want your letter to be relatively big. And the bigger that you have the letter, the smaller the inset and the offset are going to be. So a 0.25 when you have a super small letter is going to be different when you have a 0.25 with a very large letter. And the secret with these letters and designing these really is having lots of layers, lots of different colors that go together, and using different color palettes. And a great way to learn about color palettes, or if you're not good at it, like I'm really not the best with colors, I go on Google and I search space theme color palette and I look at what they have to offer and see what I like. So I'm just doing 3 insets here on my overlay. I'm going to keep that same size overlay and I'm going to make it gold. And then I'm going to do 2 smaller insets so that it's 3 layers. So I went into images and I searched planets, and now I am a relatively new, and by relatively new, I mean today, I subscribed to Cricut Access, so I'm actually in my 30-day trial. And they have a lot to offer. So I searched planets and I'm going to look for something that I can use to cut out and use as a print and cut so that I can give a little more detail to my top overlay, my top inset to that K. So I went ahead and resized this, and I want to make sure that I can see my overlay. So I'm going to pull off that top K and I'm going to place it over the planets, and then I'm going to resize that planet a little bit smaller so we get more of the image on our K. And then you can use the align up at the top, or you can just eyeball it and see where you like to have your letter placed. And now I'm going to use the slice feature at the bottom right hand corner. And then I'm going to end up deleting the pieces that I don't need. So you actually can see it was not even going to fit in the print and cut originally, but now we sliced it and we have this super cool planet that's going to be a print and cut for my top overlay. Now I'm going to go ahead and search for some stars, and I'm going to add that to my canvas as well. And with these stars, I'm going to add a couple of layers of offset so that it gives a little bit more depth. But I'm also going to add a layer that is a little bit bigger for the offset, and I'm going to use that for acetate. So when you do the offset, I'm going to actually change it to blue, and so that way I know it's supposed to be my acetate. And I want this to be relatively thick for an offset, and then I'm going to weld it together with some extra shape. So I'm going to grab some rectangles and weld those together. You want to make sure that if you're going to be doing something with acetate for that floating kind of look, that all of the pieces are connected somehow. If not, you're going to just have a bunch of little pieces of acetate that are floating, and then it's not going to work because it's not going to give you that floating look. Once you have your acetate piece done, you can go ahead and add in any layers that you want to add in. If you want to add on more, I'm going to add on 2 more layers below my initial stars on top. And again, when you're designing, it's really all about layers and adding depth to your design. Next, I'm going to add in my name, and I'm going to use a font called Astro, and you can find this font on dafont.com, and I will link it below. I get a lot of fonts from that website. So I'm going to go ahead and resize this, and again, I am going to make an offset so that it gives it some dimension. And on this one, I'm only going to do 2 layers. So the initial layer of my name and then a layer below it. I found that the letters were a little too spaced out for my liking, so I ungrouped them by letter and then just moved them over with my arrows on my keypad so that they stayed even, so that they were just a little bit closer together. And then I went ahead and I actually ended up welding these back together, not attached, welded them so that they were one big piece before I did the offset. And working with offset, it's really up to your liking, and of course, if you're making it for someone, your customer's liking. On this offset, I'm also going to off-center it so that it's not just right on the back. It's going to give it more of a shadow look. And don't forget to be resizing as you go along to make sure that everything looks correct. The last thing I'm going to add is an astronaut character, and I am just going to speed through this because just like those other ones, I'm going to make multiple layers with offsets and make sure that it has some depth. And for some of those layers, I keep the offsets the same size and I just duplicate them. So they're not even offset of each other. They're just the same size offset twice. So it gives it depth. It doesn't necessarily keep changing the size. So our last step here is to modify our letter. And this is super simple. My letters have shapes as indicators to tell you where the detached pieces go. So you're going to start by changing all of the base cuts that are lines to score lines. You're going to want to ungroup those letters and then attach the score lines onto the appropriate piece. Once you have that done and you attach everything, if you want to keep the shapes to tell you where those pieces go, please attach those as well. But once you have those changed and attached, you are ready to cut if you like your design. Please, if you're using a print and cut, make sure that you are calibrating your machine regularly, and I will also link the printer that I'm using. The one that I use, actually they don't make anymore, but I will link the one that's closest to it. I do not have a fancy printer, and it was under $100. I also get my photo paper from the dollar store. So we can start assembling, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. You're going to need foam dots and glue to assemble everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and fold in on all my score lines, and I like to have some sharp edges, so I am using a bone tool. It's not necessary. There are score lines on all of my letters, and I do have both lowercase and uppercase letters available. Once you have everything scored, I like to work in sections, and so I work tab by tab, keeping my flaps on the inside of that letter. And I just use a small amount of glue, and I'm using Barely Arts. I will link to their website below, and you can use code DINOMAMA for 10% off. And so I just go around and make sure that my flaps are super crisp and that everything is lined up. And again, you can always refer back to your design space with your letter pulled up to see where each of those individual flaps go. The letters that I've created don't have too many extra pieces, so they are kind of a beginner's letter, if you will. For the top piece, you're going to do the same thing where you fold on the score lines, and then I like to start with one long strip. I like to glue it down to one side and then work my way around, again, one tab at a time, holding, letting it dry, and then moving on to another section. Once your letter is fully assembled, now it's just about layering. So I'm going to glue down my top overlay, and as you can see, it lines up perfectly because we made sure that that size was correct. And I'm going to glue it down onto the top, and then I'm going to use some foam tapes so that there's a little bit of height for the next 2 layers. I also want to mention for these foam tapes, I'm using a liberal amount of them because I really want that letter to lay flat. I don't want it to curl up on the edges. And these foam squares I also got at the Dollar Tree. So they are not expensive, any sort of fancy foam tape. It is just generic foam squares, but they are actually relatively sticky. Once we have all of our layers done on our overlays, we can start on our smaller details. And we're going to do pretty much the same thing that we just did with those overlays. We are going to make layers using foam tape. And I like to start top down, and I'm not going to put foam tape onto my final layer on the back because I don't want to stick it down just yet. You can add the foam tape and just not remove the plastic backing so that it's sticky, but I just don't want to assemble it yet. I want to make sure that I have all of my small details created and assembled before I do any placement. So I will speed through my assembly and then we will place everything on. For my name, I ended up using glue instead of foam squares. I didn't think it was necessary to add height here. And then I did the same with my stars. I ended up using glue because they were a little bit smaller, so adding foam squares was going to be a little bit difficult. I'm using a quick stick here. I will link my Amazon shop and I have it on there. It's great for small details. It picks up your small pieces and then you can add your glue onto it. And then once you have everything assembled the way that you like, you can go ahead and just do your placement the way that you like it. So I'm going to add my stars on with my foam tape. Up at the top, I'm going to add on my name and my astronaut, making sure that you can still see that cool planet background that we picked out. I'm going to continue to work on some more designs that might be helpful to see how things are made and how you search to see how things match. So if you have themes that you want to see done, please drop a comment with what you'd like to see or even request a letter to see built. And thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun making this letter, so I hope you enjoyed seeing how it was made. Don't forget to subscribe, and happy crafting!